Welcome back to Intelligent Survival. It's a certain kind of story that spreads fast, simple, rebellious, and just believable enough to feel like you've uncovered something hidden. Cheap powder. A fix so effective it supposedly outsmarts entire industries. People swear by it. They post before and after results. They say it solved problems that would have cost thousands to fix. And if you've ever dealt with damp spaces, creeping mold, or that unmistakable smell of decay, it's tempting to believe them. But history has a way of humbling easy answers. Because when you trace these miracle fixes back through time, past online forums, past hardware store shelves, past modern chemistry, you don't find shortcuts. You find systems. You find knowledge built slowly, often through failure, refined across generations. And sometimes, you discover that what people think is a solution is actually something far more complicated, even dangerous when misunderstood. Today, we're following one of those stories all the way back, not just to understand what this substance really is, but how entire civilizations used it to survive, and why misreading that knowledge today can quietly create the very problems people are trying to solve. Let's get into it. The story begins with a material so old it predates written language. Long before iron tools, before glass, before organized cities, humans were already experimenting with stone and fire. Somewhere in the ancient world, early builders unknowingly placed limestone into a fire hot enough to transform it. By morning, those stones had changed. They were lighter, brittle, unstable, and when rain hit them, something dramatic happened. Heat burst outward, steam hissed into the air. The rock seemed to collapse into a soft, reactive mass. That moment, terrifying as it must have been, was the beginning of one of the most important building materials in human history. What they had created was the foundation of lime technology. Once people realized that this strange, reactive substance could be shaped and then hardened back into stone, everything changed. Walls became stronger. Surfaces became smoother. Entire settlements could be stabilized in ways that mud alone could never achieve. But the true brilliance of lime wasn't just in construction. Was in how different civilizations adapted it to survive their environments. In the humid jungles of Mesoamerica, for example, the ancient Maya weren't just building with lime, they were defending themselves with it. Their world was saturated with moisture, a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, mold, and disease. Left unchecked, organic decay would have overtaken their cities, so they engineered a solution. Lime plaster covered floors and plazas, creating highly alkaline surfaces hostile to microbial life. This wasn't decorative, it was protective. It allowed communities to maintain cleaner living conditions in an environment constantly working against them. But their most critical innovation went even deeper into their food supply. Through a process now known as nixtamalization, they treated maize with lime water. This unlocked essential nutrients that would otherwise remain inaccessible to the human body. Without it, entire populations would have suffered from severe nutritional deficiencies. With it, they thrived. Lime didn't just build their cities. It sustained their bodies and protected their health. Across the ocean, another civilization approached lime from a completely different angle. The Romans, known for their relentless engineering mindset, countered a problem that standard lime couldn't solve: water. Traditional lime mortar weakened in wet conditions, making them unreliable for structures exposed to constant moisture, so they experimented. They combined lime with volcanic ash and fragments of ceramics, creating a mixture capable of hardening even underwater. This wasn't guesswork, it was innovation driven by necessity. The result was a material strong enough to build harbors, aqueducts, and sewer systems that would last for thousands of years. Even today, remnants of those structures still stand. It's not because they eliminated water, but because they worked with it. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because somewhere along the line, a misunderstanding took hold. A belief that lime could be used not just to build or protect, but to remove moisture entirely. To act as a kind of chemical shortcut, something that could dry out spaces permanently, effortlessly. To understand why that idea persists, you have to look at the chemistry behind lime itself. The transformation of lime follows a cycle. It begins with limestone, which is heated to extreme temperatures until it releases carbon dioxide, leaving behind a highly reactive material known as quicklime. This substance is aggressive. It reacts violently with water, producing intense heat. When water is added in a controlled way, it becomes hydrated lime, the powder commonly sold in stores. This is where most modern use begins. But here's the critical part. By the time it reaches that form, it has already undergone its most reactive phase. It is no longer the same substance that aggressively absorbs water. It has already done that. What happens next is a slow process where hydrated lime reacts with carbon dioxide in the air and gradually turns back into stone. And during that process, something unexpected occurs. It produces water. That's the contradiction at the heart of the myth. The very reaction people believe removes moisture actually generates it. It's not in dramatic amounts, but enough to undermine the idea that this material can function as a reliable drying agent. There's another limitation that rarely gets mentioned. When lime is spread out, only the surface layer reacts with the air. As it hardens, it forms a thin crust that blocks further reaction beneath it. What remains is largely inactive. So even if someone sees a short-term effect, it's limited and temporary. And yet many people report success. They claim their damp spaces improved, that the smell disappeared, that the problem seemed to vanish. That's where biology enters the picture. Because the most noticeable symptom of moisture isn't always the water itself, it's the odor, that unmistakable, musty smell that signals decay. What people are reacting to isn't just humidity, it's microbial activity. Lime, being highly alkaline, disrupts that activity, can kill surface-level bacteria and mold spores quickly. When that happens, the smell disappears almost immediately. To a homeowner, that feels like victory, but it's not. Because the moisture, the actual cause, remains untouched, continues to rise from the ground, seep through materials, and accumulate in hidden spaces. And without the warning sign of odor, the damage progresses unnoticed. Wood begins to absorb that moisture. Over time, it becomes a host for fungi that break down its structure from within. What looks solid on the surface weakens internally. Floors begin to shift. Frames distort. Structural integrity quietly declines. By the time it becomes visible, the damage is often severe and expensive. This isn't just theory. Historical records show similar patterns in environments where moisture control was misunderstood or ignored. Buildings fail not because water exists, but because it isn't managed correctly. And that brings us back to the ancients. Because despite their advanced use of lime, they never treated it as a way to eliminate moisture entirely. Instead, they designed systems that allowed structures to coexist with it. Lime-based materials used in traditional construction were breathable. They allowed moisture to move through them rather than trapping it inside. This prevented buildup, reduced condensation, and limited the conditions that lead to decay. Modern construction often does the opposite. It creates sealed environments where moisture, once introduced, has nowhere to go. That's when problems escalate. The lesson here isn't that lime is ineffective. It's that its effectiveness depends entirely on how it's used and understood. It's also a darker chapter in its history that reinforces just how powerful and hazardous it can be. In ancient warfare, lime was weaponized. Fine particles were deployed to exploit its reactivity with moisture, particularly in the eyes and lungs. The result was immediate incapacitation. That same property in enclosed environments becomes a risk. Fine dust can travel through air currents, especially in structures where airflow moves from lower levels upward. Over time, exposure can irritate skin, damage respiratory systems, and create long-term health concerns. This isn't speculation. It's why modern industries regulate its handling carefully. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a clearer understanding of what the past actually teaches. Not shortcuts, not miracle fixes, but systems built on observation, adaptation, and respect for materials. If there's one takeaway from thousands of years of survival knowledge, it's this. You don't defeat natural forces by trying to eliminate them outright. You manage them. You design around them. You work with them. Water will always find its way into structures. The question is whether it has a way out. The civilizations that endured weren't the ones that fought moisture blindly. They were the ones that understood its behavior and built accordingly. That's the real lesson worth carrying forward. If you found this breakdown useful, if you value digging past surface-level advice into the deeper truths behind survival and history, make sure you subscribe to Intelligent Survival. Share this with someone who might be relying on shortcuts without knowing the full story. And as always, keep questioning what you're told, because the difference between knowledge and assumption can shape outcomes in ways most people never see coming.